And today we're talking about innovating like a startup. And, who am I? For folks that are at Headway, you likely know more about me, have seen some videos, things like that. But for folks that are part of the Startup Wisconsin community, I've been doing design and strategy for new products, new product development, both in startups and also corporate innovation for the last 15 years. My background is in business. I went to school for business and really self-taught design. So a lot of what I've learned and that we help companies with is learned in the trenches through experience, right? It's kind of like earned learning where you figure out what to do as you go. And so what I like to do is, my background is in business, as I mentioned, was an athlete in college. I played a couple of years of pro indoor football. Ultimate dream was to make it to the NFL. Didn't happen. I'm here, but really, I think the big part of that is how do we combine discipline with the creativity of design to build better software that actually makes an impact. And so today we're talking about some of the core principles and tenets and things like that that ultimately make better products and make better teams. And this is something that stuck with me, for a long time. When we first started Headway, I came across this from Ash Maurya, who is he has many lean books in his series, but I think a big quote here is "Life's too short to build something nobody wants," and that is so true. And the reality here is that a lot of times uh, we don't even get the ability to launch. So the only thing worse than building something nobody wants is building something that never launches, that never actually sees the light of day and makes that impact, right? And I'm sure folks at startups, at corporate innovation teams have felt that pain where you put blood, sweat, and tears and all of your focus and your craft and your discipline into something that never actually gets to move the needle and get to real users. And that is demoralizing. It's frustrating. But what we're going to talk about is like, why does that happen in some cases here and kind of go from there. But I think one of the realities here is that 40% of all software deals lose to a spreadsheet. So that means if you're a B2B SaaS, you're pitching a company and they say no, most often, 40% of the time, you lose to a spreadsheet or something that they're doing internally. And as you think about corporate innovation, as you think about large teams, they usually say things like this, like seems like a big change. Maybe next year we have some tools that can do similar things. Our teams already know how to use our tools, and ultimately, a lot of companies think, "Hey, we can build that. Our team can build that. We don't have to go buy it. Why don't we build it and then we control it and we can make sure that it's successful from there?" And that thought is great, but the reality is also the other side of that is only 15% of all these new innovation projects actually succeed and achieve a return. And a lot of times you get, these excuses from teams that, oh, that was a pet project from so and so, but he left. It's no longer aligned with our strategy, and we're not talking about you worked on something for a couple sprints, 2, 3 weeks. We're talking about large initiatives that are multi-quarter, multi-year, that ultimately get shut down before they even get implemented. Divesting away from this, everyone involved left the company, and internal team couldn't execute, or hey, we didn't have the right skill set. And so for whatever reason, things start to fail. And as you think about, really the other side of things, it is, these two fears. One fear is the fear of missing out. And those are the losses that happen when you do nothing, right? Like, hey, if we're not going to do this, are we going to be left behind? Are we going to be, seen as competitive if we don't differentiate, or if we don't do the same thing and kind of table stakes for what we offer, whether that's in the product or we offer our team? And then the fear of messing up. And, those are the losses that happen when you do something, right? Somebody makes a choice to do something different, to make a change, and ultimately it makes things worse. And the fear of messing up, and they found this on, I was on Lenny's podcast. I forget who the gentleman was, but they did a study of 2.5 million sales calls. And the reality is that the fear of messing up is far greater than the fear of missing out. And so that's why when we think about why do 40% of all deals lose to a spreadsheet, that's why, nobody gets fired for doing nothing. In most cases, if you keep status quo and, that's the way things have always been, people usually don't get fired, but they do get fired for making bets, for putting their neck out and doing things in a new way that ultimately fail. And so those new innovations can ultimately get you fired or get you demoted, or definitely be negative on what you're doing. And so the fear of messing up is very real. And so what we're going to talk about today is just some principles, some approaches, some frameworks to ultimately give you more confidence and ultimately a higher rate of success. Like, how do you get the right principles, the right process, the right things in place so that you can eliminate the failure and turn that 15% into 80%? What are the things that you can do from a tactical perspective, from a strategic perspective as a team, to align your teams better to ultimately be more successful? And we're going to talk about that. And so, most software, right? If we look at those stats, if we look at just the historical performance of new products, like, most software misses the mark, and it makes us really beg the question, why? And the reality is, like, most things are not consistent, right? You think about early stage startups, you have a lot of turnover. You think about corporate innovation, you have a lot of management that changes. And one thing that, that I've learned is that management and companies are aligned until the management changes, right? So if you get a new strategist comes in, or a new chief product officer, a new, VP of a certain product, they want to leave their mark, right? And they want to come in and make some changes really quickly. And in corporate innovation, you see that a lot because somebody leaves a department and goes somewhere else, somebody gets replaced, what have you. And now, without a fully documented strategy and full alignment on why are we doing this, what are the specific things we're trying to move, things get shut down because there's a lot of nuance that gets lost, in the process of taking on a software and figuring out, okay, why did they do it this way? Why did they do it that way? But most software ultimately misses the mark. And I think a big part of that is business would be easy if it weren't for all these people, right? And that's true for management. That's true for the people that are working on projects. That's true for people that are being served. A lot of times, as we think through why people do certain things, what's their rationale? They're not really rational. They're almost irrational, to the sense that we fall into these habits and we gravitate towards the path of least energy and friction, even if we know a little bit more would a little bit more effort, a little bit more focus, a little bit more maybe brain power would result in a far better outcome. It's easy to fall back into those things. And so as we build software, we really need to address the human side of things to make sure that our software actually misses the mark. It makes the impact and the change that we want. And giving someone the ability doesn't mean that they're going to take action. So back in 2014, I was leading, this was pre-Headway. I was leading design and strategy for a new innovation project. And, they were launching internally first and then ultimately out into the world. And their goal was to, help grow lifetime value. But long story short, we were able to take about 8-minute calls. They were doing a network operations center for telcos and things like that. We were able to take an average of an 8-minute call to get a resolution on a modem in someone's house, down to 2.5 minutes, and resulted in saving 6 to 7 figures a year, allowing for 300% utilization for them to focus their effort on serving more clients, improving the utilization rates, improving revenue, improving bottom line, all of those things together. And one of the things that we did was really focus in on why are people doing things, the way they're doing. And a big part of, learning what's going to move the needle is getting in the weeds with people, and the discipline of finding out what people care about, what actions they're taking, why they're doing it, what their rationale is. It's really important to build successful software and actually innovate. It's like we have to understand what the nuance of the problems are in order for us to solve them well. And so through that process, and this is what I would recommend for a lot of teams, that it's easy to gloss over because we always think that we know. And so what we ended up doing is actually mapping out their entire customer journey across the spectrum of how folks were solving calls. How would it go from a T2 manager to a T1? What are all the phases and activities that they're focused on in their job? What's their goal in each part of that, right? They're understanding issues, they're understanding events for down, they're figuring out how to close or escalate. What's this process and these SOPs and not the SOP from a documentation standpoint, but what are the things that people are actually doing? What are the questions and problems they're trying to solve? And ultimately, how does that impact how we might solve them better? And so our big insight, and this is true for any company, is like doing the things that are very full of friction, right? It's hard to get uh, to talk to your team and say, hey, we're going to schedule 10 calls with folks and we're going to spend an hour with them and we're going to shadow them and do an observation session, and then we're going to pick all that apart and we're going to do value calculations on what they're doing. But in that discipline and in that nuance is where you find the true opportunities to actually make the impact change. And by sitting with those team members, whether that's end users, customers that are external to your team or internal, they understand that you understand, right? They know that you care by you coming in, asking questions, observing, being able to figure out. Because then when you come back with a solution, it aligns, and you almost use it as a checkbox, of like, or a checklist of, hey, we're solving this problem for them. It allows them to do X, Y, Z. It gives them this capability. It gives them, this other thing. And so by understanding these better, you can ultimately create better software. And a big part of that I mentioned in this is the discipline to do it, because it's time consuming. It's a lot of friction. We often think like, who's going to let us observe what they're doing, what have you, like who's going to be willing to talk to us. But really in that understanding is where you're going to unlock, the next levers to the ultimately a better solution. So I love this quote, like the greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance or not knowing, but the illusion of knowledge, right? And so that process I just mentioned, it's easy for us to say, oh, we already know what they're doing mostly. But if you don't know 20% of it, like that 20% is ultimately the unlock that's going to make your solution, be better than what's out there in the market, or better than, what they're doing today, is like understanding those nuances and then solving them better versus a broad solution that, ultimately at the end of the day, software is colors, shapes, and words. And those, help you do certain things in business logic. If you can understand them, better nuance, create better workflows, create better automations, et cetera from there. So uh, as we think about strategy, um, ultimately boiling it down, like strategy is a plan to achieve short-term and long-term goals during uncertainty. And it's important to have both, right? It's important to make decisions on the data we have, not the data we don't. We'll never have a complete picture of what's happening. And so having a strategy or that plan is really important to figure out, how do we move forward? And so the next part to think about, once we think about, okay, what is the right strategy? Like, why are we changing? Why not stay the same? Why not stay status quo? If our company's profitable, if we're in the black every month, why do anything, right? It's easy to just stay stagnant and status quo, but ultimately you will be disrupted if you do nothing, right? There will be someone who comes along and understands problems better and ultimately dismantles you, even if you're a market leader. And we've seen that time and time again. And so, you know, thinking about, why we should change, there's this model that ultimately, I'm sure you've seen it, but like there's a few different factors that come into play here. These are all different levers that you can pull at any part of your business. So, the first part is, hey, we're going to decrease risk and cost. Very straightforward. And you can see some of the things here that are pertinent to, logistics, industries, holdings, utilization, shrinkage, data security, nearshore, offshoring team. Risk is like partner dependencies, solution flexibility, compliance, all these things that impact our day to day. And when we think about what we want to increase on the top side, it's where we want to increase efficiency, we want to increase revenue. And as we think about that, those are different opportunities for us to change, right? And often those are different, uh, I guess, materially different paths that it would lead us down, right? As we think about efficiency, risk, and cost, those are all bottom line games. Those are the games that impact today. That's saying, how do we get more out of what we're doing already, and not go to a new market or go to a new product or things like that? How do we become more efficient with the blocks that we do have, the building blocks, the people that we have, the products that we have already? How do we get more out of it? And as we think about really revenue, I mean, that's the top line future game. Sure, we can increase volume, we can increase things with our, the current day to day. But as we truly think about things that are going to impact revenue in the most substantial way, it's new products. It's things that ultimately help us to move forward with a different view of the future, right? And that's usually a new product towards a new customer, the same product towards a new customer, things like that that are going to help you start to unlock that next level of innovation. So a big part of like figuring out, okay, if we're going to go, you know, evaluate whether or not we buy or build, there's a lot of things that you could do, right? If you're buying software for an internal capability, those are going to be those bottom line gains, right? And so as you think about why do that, you have, typically buy out of pain. Hey, we need something that needs to be solved now, near term horizon. The impact is bottom line. We're really playing a margin game. The time to value could be 2 to 12 weeks, depending on procurement. Risk is fairly low, investment is fairly low compared to doing something custom. And as you look at building, like we usually build out of ambition to build a new future, to future proof our business, to transform what we have into the next phase of what's happening. As you think about AI and data and all the things that are coming up, your ambitions are to one, probably FOMO, not be left behind, but also that there's a wave coming that you want to get ahead of. And so as you think about building new products, it's usually that top line game where you're playing for revenue and you're playing to ultimately go score more points on the board versus play defense with what you have. And so that time to value could be 2 to 24 months, right? The risk is definitely a little bit higher than buying because there are so many things that have to line up for you to be successful and things like that. And so the big question to ask as you're thinking about innovating is like, does our vision, company vision, our purpose, does it drive us to start new revenue streams? Right? Because the route that we go down is understanding, are we trying to focus on core, which is really today games, or are we trying to focus on creating new innovative products and things that are going to impact revenue? And deciding up here why we're innovating is going to lead us to different opportunities, right? You would never get to a new product by trying to reduce existing costs in a meaningful way. Sure, there might be things you could do internally that you could create, edge cases, smaller, smaller tweaks that might help, but it's going to be a marginal gain for sure. So as you think about innovating and new horizons, it's typically leading you to brand new things. And so one thing that we've struggled or that we've seen companies struggle with is buy versus build. What do we do if we're buying a capability? How do we evaluate that? If we're building it, how do we evaluate that? And so typically it's good to focus on a business case and then a lot of the reasoning behind what we're talking about. And this will be, I'm not going to go over this in depth. This will be something that we'll link in the comments or in the video here as we wrap up. But here's a good example. It's like, why are we innovating, right? And this is focusing on an EDI play, like reducing errors, becoming the most reliable, high rated option, these goals. Like, why are we innovating? What's really the path that we're on? And then which game are we playing, right? And what are the different critical path jobs and actions? What do we need to do that from a strategy and talent perspective? What's the cost of delay? Like, what if we don't solve it, or what if we stay the same? What's the impact to the business? What's the opportunity? And so putting this together into more of a canvas view, we can be more succinct and really do what's called like bottom line thinking and bottom line strategy, where ultimately we're aligning the team around here is the opportunity that we're at. And it's just a tool that you can use to align your team as you think about, is building the right choice, is buying the right choice. And ultimately, you're not going to have one of these. You're probably going to have a half dozen or two half dozen of these products to be able to go and determine across the business, where are we buying, where are we building, what are the games we're playing. So ultimately, that's what it is. Like, business is a game to play, and there's a scoreboard, and you kind of go from there. But the reality is, whether you buy or build, the hardest thing is people and change management, right? Back to the quote, business would be easy for all these people. If you decide to adopt a new software, it's not as easy as just saying, hey, we bought it. All right, we're going to get the value out of it. It's the change management. It's making sure that you bring everybody along. And so if you're in the startup world, you're probably familiar with this crossing the chasm by Jeffrey Moore, sorry, where you've got your innovators, you've got your early adopters, the folks that are going to be willing to grab a bucket and get to work and see the vision right away. And then you've got a lot of these later stage folks. And the reality is that the market that you see adopting new technology from a consumer standpoint, and even from a business standpoint, is very reflective and mirrored inside your own company. So within your company, you've likely have all of these folks that are some that are innovators that are willing to, pick up a shovel and build the future, some that are visionaries and those early adopters. And then you've got a lot of folks that are happy in those spreadsheets that are, very resistant to change, very full of friction, will sabotage things to a certain extent to try and keep things the way they are, because shaking them up is risky, and shaking them up, like the fear of messing up or fear of things changing or not being able to do their job in the way that they know. And, we have those habits. And so by focusing on, those first two inside your company, finding people like you can build, and this is the same strategy you use to go to a market, but use the folks that are very motivated to help build those case studies and build those testimonials and build the proof points that can get the early majority on, that then ultimately, convince the late majority and laggards. It's very hard to roll out any full software without any proof in your company across, hundreds, if not thousands of employees. So how do you build that confidence along the way? Ultimately, whether you're buying or building, right? When you're building, you're still going to do these early pilots. You're going to prove it out before you go roll it out across everyone's, supply chain, across everybody's process, across all of their SOPs. You really want to focus on getting, a handful of people that are going to join you. They're going to help you hone the idea, help you, create the future of that, and then ultimately, roll it out. And so if you think about, if you do choose to build for new revenue streams, and this really gets where like innovating like a startup is really, applicable. The title of today is, there are three core components to any successful software or product team. And strategy is one of them. The design is the other, and the development is the other, right? The ability to execute and actually deliver that. And most companies have aspects of this, but they don't have that. They don't have them that all work in concert, right? Most teams are not product teams. They're not structured in a way that allows this team to operate quickly. And so if you have strategy and design, but you don't have development, right? And you're outsourcing development, you're offshoring it. Maybe you've got an internal team, but they're not quite there. They're more IT than they are, engineers. You have those slow release cycles, you have reliability, bugs, downtime, technical debt, unpredictable delivery. Hey, we've been working on this. Our goal was to launch it in 3 months. It's been 9. We're only halfway there, right? That unpredictability because they haven't honed that muscle of working alongside design and strategy, or they don't have the capabilities that your team needs. And if we have strategy and development, but we don't have strong design, we'll have things that are designed by developers, which we see a lot. We'll have poor user experiences. The user is going to have unmet needs because nobody's really focusing on that. Even if we have a good high level strategy, how we're solving it isn't really that intuitive. Confusion and frustration. And if you're serving customers, like low retention, people are going to leave. There are so many options now, and the expectations are so great for experiences, especially in the digital realm, that folks are going to look for something else. If they're feeling that friction beyond that initial onboarding, they're definitely going to be looking other places. And if we have great design and great development, but we don't have great strategy, it's very high likelihood we're going to build the wrong thing. We're going to waste time and money, and we're ultimately going to build an app, not a business, right? Because we don't have the core components that are working together to really focus on building a business and not just a product. And that's that's a huge difference in approach and in mindset. So the beauty of all of it is like, having all three of those core components, right? Strategy, design, development, having those companies work very iteratively and very step in step, right? And in some cases, well, I think we go into it a little bit later, but having that team fully autonomous to a certain extent, aligned with the strategy of the business to go and, to ultimately go and get it. And the reality is like that team needs to work really quickly together because innovation is iterative. Whether you're building a new product as a startup or as an innovation team, that team needs to go through as many cycles as possible. as fast as possible with the right tenant. So in order for us to go from, hey, we think we have an idea for the market to something that's actually hardened and released and achieving an impact, we have to iterate. So we have to eliminate the blockers, which are the silos and all the other stuff we'll talk about in a minute. And there's another quote I love from Eric Rice of the Lean Startup is the only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else. And if you've seen, there's a lot of folks that I know, founders and other people that like to read, but they never apply their learning, right? So it's not just learning faster than anyone else, a point in time, it's that iteration, back to the iteration. So how do we get something in front of customers, hone it, understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, come back with a new version, and can keep iterating and improve that learning. Because I think another thing that Eric said is it typically takes 52 cycles of learning to land on something that has like product market fit. And so in order for you to get there, 9 months, a 9-month cycle before you get customer feedback and usage isn't going to cut it. No one has that sort of revenue or that sort of patience. You're just going to cut it, right? And that's why those innovation teams fail, is their iteration cycles of looping with the people they're serving are far too short. And if you're familiar with the Lean Startup, we repurpose it and use a different version here. Instead of build, measure, learn, we do experiment, measure, learn. And so that's, looping through this continuum of interviews, like lowest effort, highest value that we can get feedback on. So interviews and conversations, moving into landing pages that help us test messaging, ideas, positioning, flows of prototypes that help us align on the solution with customers, and then proof of concepts, and ultimately like a V1 product, looping through this as fast as possible. And so the thing that I mentioned about teams is a lot of, I would say fewer startups are this way. There are still some, but many corporate innovation teams are structured this way, where they have strategy and research, in a different arm. They've got design as a different discipline, and you've got development. And those teams aren't working cross-functionally, right? And so what they end up doing is passing things from one person to the next, and really playing that hot potato. Hey, when it's done, I'll send it to you. And there's always this cost of delay because everyone else has their own roadmap, right? If strategy, design, and development, they each have their own backlog. They each have their own priorities that they're working on. They're probably working across multiple departments or multiple efforts, and managing that becomes really tough. So don't play hot potato. I think like even in, innovation teams, we see this where strategy, design, and engineering, folks don't have that, all of those in-house. And so ultimately what they do is they go to somewhere for, let's say, a big consulting company for primary or secondary research. Here's what the market's doing. And then ultimately they go to search for a company that can go prototype some ideas and do some primary research. The reality is like what the market sentiment is and what the primary research tells you is a little bit off still, because you have this delay in time that's probably, call it 3 to 6 or 9 months, depending on procurement. And then from where you have alignment in with primary research, where you have customers that align with the strategy, you really understand, the minute or the nuanced problems. Then you go, to develop it. And, we've had some partners that will offshore that. And 2-3 years later, they're still working through, the first version. And so when you play hot potato and you do these long iterations before you get things in front of people, it's very hard to be successful in that. And so when we go back to that stat of only 15% of innovation projects win or, meet the mark, it's because of this cost of delay and playing this hot potato across it. And so would very highly caution that. And so the thing that we believe is, very similar to Marty Kagan's thought on empowered teams, of like when a team takes ownership of its problems, the problems get solved. And Jocko Willink, if you're familiar, is a Navy SEAL. He's got a podcast. He's got books on extreme ownership. But giving your team the ability to succeed or fail and make decisions is really important, because then they can iterate quickly. If I always have to, before I make a choice about the product, if I have to run it up to a manager who runs it up to a VP who runs it up to, let's say the CEO was very interested in this project, you're talking about a week to make a call on something, right? That could be called in, 20 minutes. And so aligning with your product teams on what business goal they're trying to align to or impact will help them take ownership over that problem. And the reality is like not everybody is wired this way. Just because somebody's good at strategy or good at design or good at engineering doesn't mean they are business minded. It doesn't mean they will take ownership. I mean, that's definitely a different breed of person. I think some folks are happy just focusing on craft and tell me what to do. But when you think about new innovation, you want people that are going after it, that are going to take ownership, that are willing to bring new solutions and ideas, moving forward. And so part of that is aligning your team, in a similar product team model where you've got a cross-functional team of strategy, design, and development, and working across that entire stack to iterate as fast as possible. And the big caution is some teams that we see and that we work with, or have worked with in the past in a corporate innovation side, will ultimately have these product teams as I would say, a loose grouping, meaning strategy is actually only 3 hours a week on this project, and they're on a couple other projects. Design is a day a week, and developers are kind of working on this and they're kind of working on that. And you have this, part-time team that's come together. There's no focus there. And so if you can't focus on a specific outcome or on users and you're ping-ponging between all these projects, it's very hard to make good decisions around that. And so if you have a team that's not set up for success and is juggling all these balls, they're not going to be able to take ownership over that and truly care deeply about managing that impact. So that's kind of the other thing. And so typically as you think about the different types of teams, though, there's a product team. Hey, they're focusing on existing solutions, they're focusing on support and maintenance, they're focusing on incremental improvements, A/B testing, like how do we fix what's here. And a lot of times that product team is focusing on those other those three quadrants that are efficiency, that are cost, that are risk. And the pioneer team is the team that's really focusing on, going to get new revenue. And so new solutions, 0 to 1, 10x plus improvements, innovative leaps, things that are moving things forward rather than just, trying to improve what you have day to day. And so here, like what that looks like for us is aligning the team rather, than be in silos. Is one, there's, this is capabilities. So over the strategy side, business, problem, customer, market, like this person has to take ownership over that, and they have to bring that piece of the pie to the rest of the team. And so design, as we think about research, they're working with product design systems. How do we design fast? How do we make decisions that ultimately cut down feedback and loops? How do we rapid prototype? And then development, like all of this stuff works in concert. And a lot of it is around the process and principles that we've talked about already to go and loop through things. And so if you want to innovate like a startup, your teams have to be structured in a way where they are closely collaborating day to day. It could be remote. It doesn't have to be in person. And they don't even have to be in the same country, right? I think the reality is like this could be all different teams, but if they're not communicating and they're not able to take ownership over what they're doing, they're not going to be successful because there are going to be those delays where the market or users change or things come in that aren't predictable. And so as you think about the opportunity life cycle of innovating, is like, you've got, this is just one idea, but you've got, opportunities to uncover, and you're comparing, you're deciding, you're moving this specific idea forward to do exploration, you're pitching customers, you're building. And as you think about, an innovation portfolio, really, you've got a portfolio of all of these ideas, things that are coming in from customers, things that are coming in from your own team, ideas you have based on what's happening in the industry from competitors. And you have to figure out, okay, how do we truly innovate like a startup? And if we can't make multiple bets at the same time and we can only bring one forward, we're not going to be successful. So how do you create product teams that are aligned on problems, that are aligned on solving those and getting to specific business outcomes, and then give them some autonomy? Sure, you're going to need some oversight, you're going to need some management, you're going to need check-ins, things like that. But how do you build more of a portfolio that gives you the opportunity to innovate beyond just project management and things like that? And so there's a couple things that we'll really end with here, and that is like, what are some of the principles that build cultures of innovation? And so, the biggest thing is like being agile and adaptive. So focusing on customers, iterating closely with them, understanding what success looks like, and not being worried about the perfect plan, right? Where you just execute without iteration and say, hey, when it's as good as we think it could be, as we think, not our customers, then we'll go release it. Or the active planning is good, and so being agile, but then how do we adapt as we learn? And hopefully we're adapting weekly, if not even daily, as we think about things. The other thing is that we've talked about before is empowered teams. So being mission and metric driven. So giving your team metrics to own and have them make decisions within that. You need high powered teams to do that. You need teams that are experienced. They're going to cost more. You're going to invest more, but ultimately your projects are going to be more successful, and avoid that what we call flagpole syndrome, like where you're running things up the chain of command to try and get an answer or get clarity. That's delayed decisions. That's delayed action. Ultimately that team, that's if they're in that environment, that team is the clock still turns and they're not making progress, right? And so the meters of salaries or whatever you're paying them for as they wait continues to tick, versus an empowered team that maybe is more expensive but ultimately is making better decisions and executing quickly. And then the other thing is strategic execution. So practicing craft within context. So rather than thinking we see this all the time. You see this with surgeons. I always joke around with John, our CTO, but like surgeons want to do surgery, right? And so if someone makes a new way to do surgery, they're going to want to try to do that surgery as much as possible. It's something that they've created. The same thing is true if we don't have teams that are aligned on outcomes and metric driven, is that we have designers who care a lot about craft and will continue to design and design and design until things feel right. And they'll redesign things over and over. Strategy will think of, new ways. They'll whiteboard. They'll think of, okay, what are all the different other paths we could do? That's where you get analysis paralysis. And you have engineers who are more focused on trying new technology than tried and true ways that we know work. And so it's practicing that craft within context to say, we're here to build a business, not to build a brand new innovation, and understanding where you're, meaning a new technological innovation that's never been done before, right? That's very heavy R&D, a little bit different than building new innovative, projects. They can be similar but different. And the other side of this is the undisciplined action. So they're focused on craft and making things perfect rather than outcomes, right? And there's a balance you have to play, this Goldilocks zone, if you will, that you have to make things just right in order to serve customers well. There's a lot of over design, there's a lot of over engineering, there's a lot of over strategy that happens, and that ultimately will kill your burn, it'll kill your effectiveness, and teams will fail that way. So the other thing is like leverage innovation, which is kind of a funny term, but like how do we figure out what the systems and building blocks are? Like how do we get a set of Legos that we can use to drive alignment on our team, to drive consistency, to cut down on the amount of time that it takes us to create new things as we go come up with new ideas. And part of that builds upon this discipline of craft within context. Is like not everyone's going to be excited to come to work and use the same building blocks. They want to design something new, but there's a time and place for that, right? And so as you think about those two teams, staffing those teams right, and the talent and the folks that you put on each side of that is going to be important. If you put somebody who always has shiny object syndrome into a team that's focused on optimizing, they're not going to be successful, right? And that's how people leave, is that mismatch between the culture of the team they're working in and what they're ultimately trying to do. And the opposite side of this, fully leveraged systems and tools is rogue creators. Like everything's one-off. Everything takes longer. Everything takes a lot more review. There's a lot more back and forth across the team. Things that aren't necessary, right? Like most apps are 90% the same. The business logic and the things they allow you to do are different. A button is a button. A header is a header. The text is the text. So focusing on the things that move the needle are really important. And the other thing here is like being constraint driven. So, actually putting timelines, putting budgets, putting things down, even if they're self-imposed, is going to drive that decision making, and it's going to drive priority, right? The answer can't always be to build more or work longer hours or do certain things. We have to know where the line is. And part of knowing where the line is understanding our customers and doing all of those things well. Versus the other side, right? Endless iteration. Hey, we'll launch when it's perfect. You see this a lot with first-time founders. You see this a lot with folks that are kind of spinning their wheels. And even in innovation projects, right? And the other thing that's probably the most important is like unity and collaboration. And so this isn't true for departments. This is true for ultimately, if you have three vendors that you're working with across strategy, design, and engineering, and you're just managing them from a business perspective, like there can't be an us versus them, and it can't be a vendor versus internal. We have to create one team. And part of that is focusing on the right goals, aligning on the right process versus that siloed solutioning, right? Where we're doing hot potato. Hey, strategy came up with initial strategy, design's going to move on it. And then in 3 months, dev will start. And like the reality has changed since then. And so to kind of boil it down, it's like, define your why, be really honest about your current state. Like, what is your business truly good at? What do you have the capabilities for? And that's going to steer you too between buying and building. Um, and then no matter what you do, like align your team, making sure that everyone's aligned forward and then executing together. And so there's a couple things we mentioned in here that'll be available. One of them is the buy versus build canvas. We'll add that in the link to that to come up. If you want to take a look at it, there's a blank example. There's a filled in example. If you have questions, definitely let us know. But really just a tool to align on these key decisions you have to make and these key business case items that really boil it down for anybody. So, we've seen it be effective if somebody's coming into a brand new project. Like, why are we doing this? Well, here's the business case in a snapshot versus, directing them to, slide deck upon slide deck or other things that get them on board. And we also have this innovation risk assessment, right? And this is really for corporate innovation teams and teams that are trying to figure out, even large, mid to large size companies that are trying to do new innovations. It's like, are you truly ready, to innovate? Do you have what it takes from a process, from a personnel standpoint? Do you have the right mindset and alignment? And so this risk assessment will link in here too, but it'll give you some feedback on the different areas where you should strengthen across really four things. So strategy, across feasibility, across pipeline. So you think about that portfolio, like, do we have the right pipeline of ideas that are going to continue to drive our customers or our business forward? Do we have the right eyes and ears in customers? Do we have the right eyes and ears with our team? And then are we acting on those, right? Nothing is going to make a change if it's just a suggestion box of ideas that never gets prioritized and never gets, rolled out.